Welcome to the Explainer. Look, if you're a financially responsible person, chances are you walk around with this low-grade sense of financial dread. You know the feeling, right? You just feel perpetually behind. It's kind of like there was a secret meeting where someone handed out a crystal-clear roadmap to wealth, you totally missed the memo, and now you're endlessly trying to catch up to a destination you can't even locate. Well, today, I'm going to show you exactly why you feel that way. And more importantly, we're going to see why you are highly likely looking at the completely wrong scoreboard.
Here is our roadmap for this explainer. We're covering the wrong scoreboard, visible versus invisible assets, real benchmarks, how buffers actually protect you, the emotional trap, and finally, steps to calculating your actual net worth. Let's just dive right in.
All right, section 1. The wrong scoreboard. Why feeling behind is basically a structural trap. So imagine you've been playing this disciplined, long game with your money, but you still feel like you're losing. Why is that? Because you're reading the wrong scoreboard. Case in point. $53,000. That is a seriously jarring number, but it is the actual median retirement savings for Americans in their 50s. And hey, this isn't a guess. That's Fidelity's 2024 data, pulled straight from 45 million live accounts. If you apply the standard 4% withdrawal rule to that 53 grand, it yields just $2,120 per year in retirement. That is literally $176 a month after a lifetime of working. Stack the average Social Security check on top of that, and this median retiree is looking at just over $2,100 a month with absolutely zero margin for error. They are one single car repair away from the math collapsing entirely. Section 2. Visible versus invisible assets. Let's call this the tale of Dave and Kevin.
The fundamental problem we're facing here is that American consumer culture has spent the last 40 years optimizing for visible signals of wealth rather than actual accumulation. Take Dave, for example. Dave earns a really solid $130,000 income. He drives a brand new finance truck, just renovated his kitchen, and presents the perfect visible lifestyle. But behind the scenes, he's sitting on $22,000 in credit card and loan debt, and his net worth is just $90,000, which is mostly theoretical home equity anyway. Now let's look at Kevin. Kevin earns significantly less, $85 grand a year. He drives a fully paid off 6-year-old car and rents a perfectly functional apartment. But Kevin quietly maxes out his retirement accounts every single year. His actual net worth is $510,000. So Dave looks richer, and he probably feels richer on a Tuesday, but Dave's visible success actively destroys his ability to compound real money because his income is constantly being siphoned off by interest payments. Meanwhile, Kevin is absolutely dominating the invisible game of wealth. Moving on to section 3, real benchmarks versus retirement myths. Let's look at what the data actually shows us. A recent survey found that the average American falsely believes they need exactly $1.27 million to retire comfortably. That staggering myth creates this massive, anxiety-inducing gap between expectation and reality. But actual median 401k balances, they tell a very different story. In your 20s, the median is about $5,000. In your 30s, $11,000. In your 40s, $36,000. So think about this. If you're 43 years old and you have 180 grand saved up, you might be privately beating yourself up because you're nowhere near that $1.27 million myth we just talked about. But statistically speaking, you're actually in the top 20 to 25% for your age group. Let's look at the ultimate arbiter of the real scoreboard, the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances. The median net worth for households between the ages of 45 and 54 is approximately $247,000. For ages 55 to 64, it sits at about $570,000. Hitting these numbers means you are statistically ahead. You are not catastrophically behind. We really need to stop comparing ourselves to aspirational targets that are basically designed by influencers just to make us feel insecure. Section 4. Buffers protect compounding. Let's talk about the structural trap of living without any margin. Get this, a staggering 56% of Americans literally cannot cover a $1,000 emergency using their savings. To see exactly how this plays out, let's look at a guy named Ray. Ray had a seemingly stable life, but absolutely zero buffer. So when his car's transmission failed, which is a completely predictable $1,300 emergency, he had a major problem. Without liquid savings, he had to put it on a credit card, charging 22% interest. It ended up taking him 8 full months to pay it off, which means that repair actually cost him closer to $1,780. A lack of margin takes a predictable, temporary bump in the road and turns it into a structural trap that just absorbs every extra dollar and completely halts your ability to save.
So how do we build a true defense? Here's a much better 3-tiered framework for emergency funds. Level 1 is basically survival mode, having less than a month of expenses set aside. Level 2 gets you to stability, which is 1 to 3 months of expenses. And level 3 is what we call operational freedom.
3 to 6 months sitting in a high-yield savings account earning around 4%. You see, an emergency fund doesn't just exist to fix a broken car. Its real job is to protect your investment contributions. It protects your long-term compounding from getting completely derailed by a busted transmission.
All right, Section 5, the emotional investing trap. This is why incredibly smart investors end up underperforming. Data shows the average equity investor underperforms the S&P 500 by 3 to 4 percentage points annually. And it's not because of management fees, it's because our own brains betray us through a glitch called loss aversion. Basically, the psychological pain of losing a dollar is roughly 2 to 2.5 times more intense than the pleasure of gaining one. That means a 5% drop in your portfolio feels emotionally like a 12% drop. This overwhelming psychological pain is exactly why otherwise brilliant people absolutely panic, sell at the absolute bottom of the market, and then inevitably buy back in at the absolute peak. This quote right here is everything. Your index fund does not have feelings. It really doesn't. It doesn't read apocalyptic Reddit threads. It doesn't panic over the daily news cycle. Not feeling anything is actually an enormous structural advantage when it comes to long-term investing. Look at the math. 3 to 4 percentage points of underperformance on a $200,000 portfolio over 20 years costs you roughly $162,000 in lost compounding. That is the literal cash cost of making emotional decisions. Finally, Section 6, Steps to Actual Net Worth. This is your specific action plan. We've looked at the real data. We've broken down the psychological traps. So now, let's figure out exactly where you stand. You need to calculate your actual net worth. The formula is incredibly simple, but man, is it revealing. You just add up all of your assets, so that's your retirement accounts, your savings, and your home equity. Then you subtract all of your liabilities, your mortgage balance, your car loans, and your credit card debt. Whatever that final number is, that is your true, real position on the scoreboard. Seriously, ignore what your neighbor is visibly spending right now. Focus strictly on these foundational numbers. Here are your 3 actionable steps to build a rock-solid foundation right today. Step 1, like we just covered, calculate your actual net worth. Step 2, build that 3-month emergency buffer and park it in a savings account earning around 4%. Remember, this is your shield. It protects your compounding. And step 3, automate your investments and ignore them. By automating your contributions directly into low-cost index funds, you intentionally create friction between yourself and that dangerous sell button. You basically bypass emotional loss aversion entirely. And that brings us to the end of our explainer. But before we go, I want to leave you with one provocative thought to chew on. Which scoreboard are you going to check tomorrow? Are you going to keep agonizing over the visible spending of everyone around you? You know, the shiny new trucks and the fancy renovated kitchens completely financed by debt? Or are you going to start dominating the real, invisible game of wealth, compounding quietly in the background? The choice is entirely yours. Thank you so much for joining me, and whatever you do, keep focusing on what actually counts.